Hello team, welcome to another ATP Geopolitics video with myself, Jonathan MSP. It's the Ukraine war, I guess a news update, but it's concerned only with the US military aid package that has been proposed by Mike Johnson, the Speaker of the House of Representatives. And it's going to be a fairly long one because I'm going to dip into a bunch of different other videos to give you a sense of what people are saying about this. I hope it's useful for you. This is obviously a developing scenario. Let's give you the basics up front of what's going on. For those of you who are not au fait with American politics, you have three parts to, I guess, Congress. Well, you've got the president, you have Senate, which is 100 senators, and they rule for 6 years, and they're about 50-50. They're kind of there are some people who are independents who caucus with the Democrats, so it's about 51 to 49, essentially Democrat-led House, and they voted on a bill for military aid to Ukraine, Israel, Taiwan. And that was voted through 70 to 29. But of course, the important part is it had Israel and Ukraine aid on that bill. And that would appease some of the Republicans with regard to Israel, so that you might have some people who weren't so up for Ukraine who are voting for that because they are up for Israel aid. And so there's some interesting dynamics going on there. And that was not passed. So that's been passed. That was passed in the Senate in February, but actually there's been no aid other than presidential drawdown authority aid since the end of August last year or whenever it was. So we're talking 7 months of nothing happening, and that's because the Speaker of the House, who's the majority party, gets to have the Speaker of the House, who then can dictate certain things. But they at the present time have a majority of one, so a very slim majority. And you've got the schism. This is the GOP, the Republican Party, and they have this majority of one, and a schism within the Republican Party where you have establishment Republicans and MAGA Republicans who are kind of answerable to or answering to Trump, and they disagree on certain things. And you've got Mike Johnson, who's a speaker, who is he was called MAGA Mike, okay? So he was very much in the MAGA movement, and indeed was elected at the same time, came in with Donald Trump, effectively, in 2016-17. He has now incurred the wrath of other MAGA members like Marjorie Taylor Greene, who really, really don't want aid to Ukraine, for whatever reason. And I've talked about that before, but yeah, it's an issue. But they say, if you're going to put any money to Ukraine, we are going to vacate. So we're going to get you removed from being the speaker, and we'll go through some big election process to get someone else in as speaker. If it would need Democrats to also vote him out. Now, with Kevin McCarthy, when he was voted out as being speaker previously, so there was a move to vacate him, motion to vacate him. All of the Democrats are like, yeah, we hate Kevin McCarthy, so get rid of him. And they got Mike Johnson in, who actually the Democrats kind of hate more, right? He is so not what Democrats like. So he's a Christian nationalist. I mean, that's a technical term for what he is. So he believes in dominionism. He doesn't really believe in the Constitution so much as the biblical authority. And that's not what Democrats like. So if it wasn't all this mess going on, if there's a motion to vacate him, you would probably assume that all the Democrats would vote him out. However, the Democrats want so much stuff to get done right now that they need him in place to get it done. And if Marjorie Taylor Greene wants to vacate him, they ended up being in a situation where they hate Marjorie Taylor Greene more than they hate Mike Johnson. So you get the situation where some Democrats are like, I don't want him in that position. I would like him to be vacated. But if it's Marjorie Taylor Greene who wants to vacate him, I'll keep him in because I hate her even more. So you get all these dynamics going on. And at the end of the day, the result is that this is the session, the congressional session that has had least legislative activity since goodness knows when. It's one of the worst in history. And that's a real issue. especially when there are dire consequences to that inactivity, such as people dying in Ukraine as a result of what Putin is doing. But then you have people in the Republican Party, this MAGA wing, who appear to be trying to appease Putin. Is that because of Trump, etc., etc.? Okay, so that's the background. Now let's go into what has finally happened. So you had this bill that was passed through Senate. So instead of passing that bill, the easiest thing for Mike Johnson to have done that would have expedited aid to both Israel and Ukraine and Taiwan as quickly as possible would be to have passed the Senate bill, because it wouldn't need to go back to the Senate. You pass what they've done, you get it out there. Instead, he's split that Senate bill effectively up into 4 constituent parts. And it broadly looks like it's going to be the same as a Senate bill with a few changes, like some bits are loan, some bits of this. Actually, some bits are slightly better, with very overtly talking about ATACMs. But essentially, it's really kind of the same bill split out. Now, so the question is, well, why not just go for that bill? Why split it out? And he seems to be trying to appease certain people whilst also remaining true potentially to some ideal he has in his head. And this is where it gets all a bit complicated, because we're trying to second guess what he believes himself. Anyway, during the day yesterday, news came out that despite strong pressure from the GOP MAGA bloc, so that's the first important thing to note, that this splitting of the 4 and putting these bills out is not what a lot of people who want him to have his seat vacated want. They, like people like Marjorie Taylor Greene, don't want this to happen. They want stuff to do with the border put forward, and this has nothing to do with the border. So Johnson pushes forward on his plan to bring 4 separate bills up for a vote, of which one consists of aid to Ukraine. So, okay. Phillips O'Brien says to this, don't count out the MAGA true believers. They are still organising to stop aid to Ukraine under any conditions, and this appears to be true. Also, nothing from Trump yet, so the pressure for passing Ukraine aid must be kept up. And this is in response to Heritage Action. So Heritage Foundation is a think tank, that a lobbying group in America that I have written a massive article on before to show how money has gone from Russia to Hungary. And there are 2 organizations in Hungary, the Bethany Foundation and another one, that get their money from Orban's propaganda arm. Literally, they get funded by the propaganda funding for Hungary. That then gets fed into the Heritage Foundation. Literally, they get the funding from Hungary, and Russia, Hungary, 2 organizations, Heritage Foundation. And the Heritage Foundation lobbies the Republican Party and is involved in the CPAC, the Conservative Conference, and is the organization behind Project 2025, which is a blueprint for a Trump presidency. So we can map money from Russia through Hungary to American politics, to the Republican Party. And the Heritage Action is the political arm of the Heritage Foundation, and they are notifying Hill offices of their opposition to the rule governing the foreign aid bills, warning of a key vote no to lawmakers. This is very worrying, and it makes you realise who is working under the bonnet here. People like Adam Kinzinger, who is a Republican who's no longer a lawmaker because of the whole January the 6th thing, and he was involved in the committee that was investigating Trump over January the 6th. Go and read Oath and Honor by Liz Cheney. It is a phenomenal book, and I disagree with all of her politics, apart from the courage it took her and the meticulous nature of gathering all of the evidence over that. Very, very good book. Adam Kinzinger, who helped her with that, says, and he's a former veteran, he says, I don't know who needs to hear this, but we aren't helping Ukraine. Ukraine is helping us pass the friggin' bill. Now, whether he actually means the individual bill as one of the 4 or the Senate bill, or maybe both, either, whatever, just get something passed. He's a massive advocate. But then you get the other side of the coin here. So that's kind of your responsible Republican voice. Then Kiev here says more confirmation. Trump not only has a deal to hand Ukraine to Putin, but that he wants to be the guy who takes credit for it, so Putin finally respects him or owes him. So this is Donald Trump Jr. casting his opinion. Why are those GOP leadership losers like Representative McCall pushing a bill that would do the bidding of Democrats and hurt my father's ability to negotiate an end to the war between Russia and Ukraine? McCall is a globalist who puts America last. J.D. Vance, who's an appeaser, by the way, J.D. Vance is a senator from Ohio who wants the war to stop by forcing the Ukrainians to the negotiating table by stopping funding. And he puts America first, right? So that's where Donald Trump Jr. is coming from, and that's the son of the president. And it would be rather weird if Donald Trump himself didn't have those opinions, and he appears to have those opinions. But he also is running a campaign where he must be looking at the poll data that shows that most Republican voters support aid to Ukraine. So Trump has kept a little bit quiet on this. Remember, Mike Johnson went to see Trump in Mar-a-Lago, and Trump sided with Mike Johnson and said, I'm not keen on this move to vacate. However, he kind of went back on what he said yesterday in an interesting volte-face, where he's kind of said, he was a bit vague, but he said, we'll have to see about whether he supports Mike Johnson. So Mike Johnson might well be on his own again and requiring the support of Democrats as well as Republicans to keep his job. My view has been that Mike Johnson has in his head this abstract idea that supporting Ukraine is the right thing to do. He has seen intelligence, and he keeps mentioning that he has long said the right things, sort of the right things on Ukraine, and Putin being a bad guy. My position is that he evaluates that retaining his job as speaker is much more important than that. That even though he recognises who the good guys and the bad guys are in that war, I recognise that, but I need to keep my job, and I really want to please Trump even more than that. And there's this tension then, because Trump doesn't recognise the same as I do, as Mike Johnson, as to who the good guys and bad guys are, and nor does Marjorie Taylor Greene. She's holding a gun to my head. I want to please Trump, and here I am therefore compromised. So somehow he has to come up with something that allows him to do the right thing, and I say that in scare quotes, by presenting bills, even though it might end up pleasing Trump and Marjorie Taylor Greene in the long run and not getting aid to Ukraine, but it absolves him of responsibility because he actually believes there should be aid to Ukraine, if you get my meaning. We're going to look a little bit at these dynamics in a second. So Noel reports saying it took Mike Johnson 7 months to realise and cost thousands of Ukrainian lives here. What's he talking about?
Everyone would be able to give it.
In fact, we're going to go to this later, so I've got the full interview there that I'll go and dip into. In that interview with Jake Tapper, he does say, I'm a Reagan Republican. I believe in peace through strength, which is really interesting because that is a move away from kind of MAGA Republicanism and appealing to those establishment Republicans, but also possibly donors. So we know at the moment, it's really important to understand that the Republican Party, and some more context here, recently the RNC, the Republican National Convention, has merged with the Trump campaign directly. And the Trump campaign, which is the campaign to get Trump elected, not just the campaign to get Republicans elected all across America, which is the RNC, that's what they're responsible for. The Trump campaign wants to get Trump as president, and by extension necessitates him not being put in jail. And so the Trump campaign is paying out money for Trump's legal fees. Now, if you're merging the Trump campaign with the RNC, it means money that is being raised by donors for the Republican Party is being siphoned off for Trump's legal fees, which means that there will be down ballot Republicans up and down the country of the United States who are going to appeal to the RNC for funding for their campaign. So it might be a legislative, it might be a state senator or something, or in the state legislature who would like to be elected in November 2024, and they write down this ballot and down ticket, and they no longer can get that money because that money no longer exists for them because it's been siphoned off for Trump's legal fees, which then means you're going to have a lot of pressure on people right across the US, down ticket, but also in states, in districts and states, for certain senators and certain representatives will struggle to get decent funding. The Republican Party also has, I think, less than half the funding the Democrats have at the moment. Democrats had record fundraising. Trump had supposedly a fundraising event where he raised double the amount of Biden on that record fundraising night, but he's not released the figures, and pretty much no one believes that. He said we raised 50 million, which is exactly twice what Biden said he raised, and then subsequently has not released where any of that money's come from. And at that event, there were actually not very many people there, so it's like, it doesn't quite add up. And the idea is that you get your normal funding through, and then after 6 months, you say, here's the 50 million, and it's come from the last 6 months, and he said it came from that night. That's generally what people think has happened. Anyway, the point is that they're really struggling for money. Now, why I've explained that all to you is because some of what might be going on here is Mike Johnson appealing to donors to say, look at me, I'm responsible, I am doing the right thing for the Republican Party. These guys around me are all squabbling, but I am trying to lead the ship in the correct direction. And therefore, that is a good sign that donors can and should donate to the Republican Party because we are a responsible governing unit. Is the messaging, arguably. Right, okay, now let's, as Dimitri here says about Mike Johnson saying that he's a Reaganite, so I'm not buying this. Why the sudden change of heart over so much damage already being done? Specifically, Ukrainians have died due to not having access to necessary weaponry. Right, now let's go to, and again, I'm going to dip into a number of fairly lengthy news pieces. This is Mike Johnson talking about, and of course, I haven't even mentioned the bill yet and the details of the bill. We'll come to that. This is all the context.
Speaker, explain your plan to break up these different foreign aid bills.
Yeah, thanks, Jay. Good to see you. Listen, this is a better policy and a better process, okay? We got the Senate supplemental several weeks back, and it was everything sandwiched together. That's not the way that regular order is supposed to work. And many of my conservative friends, some that you just pictured there, are some of the most vocal advocates for the regular process of the House. And that means that we look at things in single subject. We look at them individually on their own merits. And so I made the decision that we should break this into 4 parts so that you evaluate Israel and Ukraine and the Indo-Pacific funding measures, and then our separate national and foreign aid responsibilities separately. So there's 4 separate bills. Everyone would be able to give it an up or down vote based on their own merits, and that's what they desire. Now listen, we made a better product as well, because there is Ukraine, as you know, is controversial. What we did, Jake, in this package, we changed it. 80% of the spending for Ukraine is replenishment of American weapons and stocks. That's a really important thing for our own U.S. industrial base. And
so what he's doing here is he's trying to sell the bill in the correct way. He's saying to those people who don't really understand how funding to Ukraine works, he's trying to say, look, a lot of this money stays in the US, etc., etc. I have sped up his speaking. That might annoy people, but I just okay, let's put it down to normal speed, just to keep people happy.
And defense base, and that's going to be a very important part of it. And we added other innovations that conservatives like and that make good sense. I mean, for the Ukraine piece, for example, any assistance that goes for governmental aid is converted to a loan. That's what a lot of people said was very important, and we implemented that. You know, there's a lot of innovations here, and I think it's a better product in the end.
So I guess one of the things that some of these Republicans are upset about is that they also want border security to be attached to that. Now, you're going to put forward a border security bill, although I don't think it's been released yet. Yeah. But answer their question as to why it's not part of this.
This is very simple. I'm operating with the smallest margin in U.S. history. I have a one-vote margin, Jake. So in order to get something into this underlying package, we have to have the votes on the floor to pass a rule. You know, that's how the process works here. The rule allows for the substantive bill to be put on the floor. I don't have all my Republicans who agree on that rule, and that means the only way to get a rule on the floor is that it requires a couple of Democrats. Well, they're not for the border security. That's not their policy. Some of these folks like open borders. That's what their votes show and indicate. And so we don't have a way, I literally don't have the numbers, I don't have a way to merge it together. So we're running two separate packages. The border security measure is...
And that's really interesting, because I think I genuinely believe in there, which is like, if I did attach this border stuff, which is what these Marjorie Taylor Greene sorts really want me to do, and they're really angry I haven't done that. But I couldn't have done that, because we couldn't have put these all together in a rule, because the Democrats just wouldn't have had that on board, and nothing would have happened. And then we're back to square one, and I look like I can't achieve anything in my position. So at some point, as a speaker with a majority of only one, you have to work with Democrats to get things done, or you have to consider how the Democrats are going to react to anything you do, because you need at least some of them.
An absolutely critical one. It has changes for reinstating remain in Mexico, ending catch and release, the asylum reform,
we won't look at that.
The Republican Party, the House Republicans have been using that, working on it every day, this Congress, every single day, and we'll continue to, and that's our priority, and I think it shows the contrast between our side and the other side.
So I understand what you're doing, breaking up these foreign aid packages, Ukraine, Taiwan, Israel, letting the House work its will, and then sending over to the Senate into one bill, whatever passes. Why didn't you do this months ago? I mean, Ukraine is desperate for aid.
Yeah, they are. Well, it takes a long time to socialize and build consensus when you have the smallest majority in U.S. history, so that's part of it.
So this is where he's just talking absolute nonsense, because what he's done is he's produced 4 bills that are essentially the same as a Senate bill, and then he's going to separate them and then tie them back up together to send them to Senate to be voted on as a whole. I believe that's somehow how it's going to work. So the question is, yeah, it doesn't take that long, because you literally could have put that Senate bill to the floor and allowed people to vote on it. I mean, that's democracy. You can talk about, we need to get consensus. Well, the consensus comes out of the voting, right? So Mike Johnson's defense here just doesn't work.
Part of it, and it's very practical politics here. But also, we've had other big lifts in this Congress. As you know, we had to get the government appropriations bills done, and then we had to do the renewal of the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act, and some pretty heavy measures, and it was a lot to handle at one time. Look, we know what the timetable is. We know the urgency in Ukraine and in Israel, and we are going to stand by Israel, our close ally and dear friend, and we're going to stand for freedom and make sure that Vladimir Putin doesn't march through Europe. These are important responsibilities. A strong America is good for the entire world.
And this is all correct.
Really,
all
the
correct.
Responsibility for the free world has been shifted onto our shoulders, and we accept that role. We're an exceptional nation. We're the greatest nation on the planet, and we have to act like it. And we have to project to Putin and Xi and Iran and North Korea and anybody else that we will defend freedom. It doesn't mean boots on the ground. We're not the world's policemen, but we're going to do the right thing. And I think the Congress is going to take an important stand here.
So
all of that's correct.
Colleagues are blasting your plan to separate the bills. Here's a little sampler that we presented and prepared for you.
Surrender. It's disappointing. I won't support it. It's disappointing. It's completely detached from what our base wants, what our voters want.
Well, go ahead, move it. I mean, I'm a voting no. I'm voting no. I've never voted to give any money to Ukraine, and I'm not going to do it today.
I'm absolutely disappointed.
I don't know how long people are going to tolerate this, because he's doing nothing but serving the Democrats.
All right, I'm sure you know those voices, but it's Gates, Crane, Nels, Burleson, and of course Marjorie Taylor Greene. Are you going to have to rely on Democrats to pass the rule in order to bring these bills to the floor, and also the legislation itself?
Well, I hope not. I hope that our Republican colleagues will stand together, stick together on.
He says, I hope not, but he literally, considering those people have just said they won't vote for it, he has to have Democrats. So
this, I think we understand. Look, I'm a child of the 80s. I regard myself as a Reagan Republican. I understand the concept of maintaining peace through strength. That's one of our guiding principles. It's a really important philosophy, and it's a big part of our party and our worldview. And I think here is an opportunity to make that stand at a really critical time in world history. I mean, there are global implications to what we do. So, look, everybody can grumble about details of the legislation. What I remind my friends, and everybody you just showed are all good friends, listen, we're not going to get 100% of what we want right now because we have the smallest majority in history, and we only have the majority in one chamber. The Republicans run the House. We have the small majority in the House. The Democrats are in charge of the Senate and the White House. So by definition, we won't get everything we want, but we got a great product here at the end, much better than the alternative that came in the Senate supplemental. And now everybody gets to vote their conscience, up or down. That's what we're for, regular process, regular order, and accountability to the people. And I think you'll see that here this week.
So Marjorie Taylor Greene, who has emerged as perhaps your chief nemesis in the House Republican Conference, is promising that this motion to vacate, to get rid of you, will happen. And I'm wondering, have you talked to Democrats at all about if that happens, and if some of these Republicans vote to remove you as Speaker, and this is not a hypothetical, it looks like this actually might happen, will Democrats vote to keep you as Speaker?
I've not asked any Democrats to get involved in that. I believe the House will do its will. Look, I'm trying to govern and lead this institution at a very interesting, unprecedented time. We have challenges right now that no previous generation has faced. Newt Gingrich posted a few days ago on social media, the Speaker's job is effectively impossible now. He said that I'm doing the hardest job that maybe it has ever been in the history of the U.S. House. Maybe, he said, arguably since the Civil War. Why? Because we live in a very divided time, very divisive politics, in the age of social media and 24-hour news cycle, where everybody can express their opinions every moment of the day about things they're disgruntled about. It makes a lot of challenges, but we're going to get through this. Listen, we are the greatest nation in the history of the world, okay? We are going to show that. We're going to keep the train on the tracks and not get derailed and get involved in all of this at such a dangerous time on the world stage. And look, I don't walk around thinking about the motion to vacate. It's a procedural matter here that I think has been abused in recent times.
I'd agree with
Maybe
that.
at some point we change that. But right now I got to do my job. And so do all my colleagues, and I'm confident at the end of the day, in spite of all the drama and all the palace intrigue, I think we're going to get that done.
Well, if they bring the motion to vacate forward, there aren't enough Republicans, there aren't 218 or whatever Republicans to remove you. Somebody's going to need Democrats. I mean, it's only going to happen, whatever the outcome is, that person will need Democrats. So if you win and keep your job, if there is a motion to vacate, it will be with Democratic support. Or these people who are, who rebelled against Kevin McCarthy and thought voting with Democrats was the worst thing in the world will also use Democratic votes.
And we'll come back to that idea a little bit later.
I'm not focused on that. I'm focused on doing my job. Look, when you do the right thing, you let the chips fall where they may. I mean, that's how that's my life philosophy, and that's how I govern here every single day. We try to get the best possible outcome.
I don't think getting the best possible outcome has been delaying for 7 months.
Every day and not all the drama. That's my answer.
So there's another player here that we haven't talked about, Donald Trump, who you support for president. I want to play some of what he said last night when he was asked if he plans to protect you from any sort of motion to depose of you by the far right. Take a listen.
President, how should Israel protect Speaker Johnson?
Well, we'll see what happens with that. I think he's a very good
Did he brief?
We'll
see what happens.
With that. I think he's a very good person. Have you talked to Trump about this plan, this legislative plan, in terms of how you're introducing these foreign aid bills? And ultimately, will he have your back?
Oh, I think he will. I was just with him on Friday down at Mar-a-Lago, and we had dinner together, and my wife was with me, and we had a great visit. We talked about a lot of things, all the politics going on in the country, and he said at a press conference we had there together that I'm doing a very good job, and he supports me and all of that. Listen, I think this is all going to work out. I think it's going to be fine. I did tell the president the plan on all of this, and I think he clearly understands why we're running this play and why we need to do this. I think this sets up the next election, the next administration, the next president, and I believe he's going to win, in a better position. I think that President Trump is strong enough that he could enter the world stage and broker a peace deal in Ukraine if Russia is still advancing at that time. I mean, I think he has the strong enough hand to be able to do that, and that's why this election is so important. There's a very stark contrast. We didn't have all these global conflicts. We didn't have hot wars around the globe when Donald Trump was the president. You know why? Because our adversaries feared him and respected him.
It's because they got everything out of him without having to go to war.
That's a real problem for all of us.
So let me just ask one quick question about policy. If Donald Trump does win, and if the Republicans keep the majority, will you bring the national abortion ban up?
So that's where we're going to leave that. We'll now look at what it actually has. So the draft text of the bill, which allows aid to Ukraine, has been published. The key highlights, according to no reports, are the bill obliges the US president to hand over long-range ATACMS, the type is unspecified, to Ukraine as soon as possible after it enters into force. The president is able to postpone the handover or if the transfer of ATACMS, in his opinion, will harm the national security interests of the US. So you could say that might as well not be in there, and you've still got the same calculation. Either he thinks it's worth it or not, but it's kind of highlighting ATACMS and forcing maybe Biden to vocalize why he might not be handing over ATACMS. So that's an interesting addition. In total, $61 billion will be allocated, of which $23.2 billion will be used to replenish defense goods and services provided to Ukraine. So that's basically $23.2 billion to fund the US Army. The US Army stockpiles. $11.3 billion for current US operations in the region. Interesting. $13.8 billion for the purchase of the latest that in the region. So that's going to be the US doing work in Poland and Germany, etc., etc. $13.8 billion for the purchase of the latest weapons systems, goods and services for defense purposes. $26 million to continued oversight and accountability for assistance and equipment provided to Ukraine. $7.8 billion for direct financial assistance to credit to Ukraine. After November the 15th, 2024, the president will be able to write off up to half of that debt amount after submitting the appropriate rationale to Congress. So that is like a loan, but it can be written off. And the bill requires the Pentagon and State Department to provide a clear US strategy for Ukraine within 45 days. That's interesting. That's something that Republicans have long been asking for, is that we want a strategy. But of course, it's very difficult to have a US strategy from Ukraine that involves what Ukraine are planning to do. And Ukraine can't have a strategy if they don't know what arms they're going to get. And so you have this real chicken and egg scenario where you need to give aid for them to then know what they've got to produce a strategy. But the idea is that actually, okay, after 45 days, you should be able to get that because then they know how much aid they're getting, etc., etc. TENDAR adds to this. Allocation of more than $60 billion. Yeah, most of it's military aid, especially operation and maintenance. Defense-wide section with $27.9 billion makes it the largest package. It also includes support for civil society, economic support fund for $7.9 billion, as mentioned, provided as a loan. Yeah. Funds are available till at least till the end of the year, but certain parts, such as missile procurement, are valid until even as late as September 2026. It calls to provide a strategy to hasten Ukrainian victory against Russia's invasion forces in a manner most favourable to United States interests and objectives, possibly the first time that victory is explicitly expressed in a formalised manner. So, yeah, there's just a few other bits and pieces there to add to that. And this is how it looks as an infographic. So military aid, replenishment of US arsenals, budgetary aid, support for priority sectors of the economy in the form of a loan, so on and so forth. So you can pause that and look at that. And apparently Biden is in favour of it. So he's backed it. So yeah, if we can get it through, I'll sign it tonight type thing. Now, talking about what Speaker Mike Johnson is really trying to do, I think this is a fascinating portrayal of what is going on.
To see if he can sweeten it for them, which is...
I'm just going to turn up the sound to this.
Maybe is he trying to screw the Dems here? I don't quite understand.
No,
from his perspective, what he thinks he's doing.
No, he's not trying to screw the Democrats. I think that, first of all, Mike Johnson he thinks he's Moses, and he said yesterday in his professorial tone that they need a steady hand of the wheel, and he said, I regard myself. I think of myself, I regard myself as a wartime speaker. So he's telling now,
who is the greatest challenge since any speaker since the Civil War?
Yes.
I think.
So he is telling donors who are saying, we're not going to fund this shit show one more month. You've lost members. They're leaving early to fuck you over intentionally. You all hate each other, and you're trying to sink your majority. So,
just to let you know who these people are, these are three conservatives on the Bulwark podcast. She's wearing a Mike Pence T-shirt there. I mean, these are Republicans who have kind of got disillusioned with the MAGA strain of republicanism and now are kind of cast adrift, or even going as far as supporting Biden in preference to Trump. And that reference to Johnson being Moses, that's literally what Johnson said at a speech. I wrote an article on that sometime back, that he actually sees himself as the new Moses. But it's really interesting how she sees him as appealing very much to donors here, and that's his positioning.
So he's telling them, as he told President Zelensky and others, that he intends to do the right thing. So that what he has designed lets him look like he's doing the right thing, and that he's trying to please everybody and navigate the choppy waters and govern. And I get, JVL and I've talked about this, I now and then get a little hopeful that he has an ounce of shame and wants to do the right thing and feels terrible about Ukraine. And in the FISA debate, when Trump, either because he does have some kind of dementia onset, confused and conflated Title I of FISA with Section 702 with FISA a week and a half ago. He either did it intentionally or not.
I think. I'm not sure it's dementia. I just don't think he can read.
But when he did it, Johnson stuck his neck out and said, I know members are confused about this and they're making up stuff about this, but they have to go to the SCIF, as I did. And he said, they need to seek the same information. You've got to be fully informed. And he defied Trump on this. So I have my moments where I think he's either trying to do the right thing or he's signaling to donors that he intends to do the right thing. Either one.
And I this is exactly what I think. So I've long said that I think deep in his head, he knows what's right and wrong. And I think also he's trying to signal to donors. And I think there's evidence of that. But that there are other variables that are just more valuable to him than the right and wrong, which is appeasing the Almighty. And that's not his normal Judeo-Christian God, that's his Trumpian God.
One, right, gets him to this middle land where he's Moses in the middle of all the madness, and he's going to do the right thing and save everybody. He's not. Everything that Tim just described, this entire 4-step process, 4 bills, but under a single rule, but open to amendment. And the minute you open this up, you sink it and you kill it. The Senate was never going to, this was never going to work out. And so
this is where we start going, oh, okay. So although all that rhetoric that he's just said on CNN and the idea that he knows right and wrong, and this appears to be all good, and the bill itself looks pretty decent, all things considered, it's never going to work.
It's designed to look like he cares and he's really sorry it didn't work out. And then, all he had to do was pass the Senate bill. So he's on this call after Iran attacks Israel, and President Biden and Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell and Senate Majority Leader Chuck Schumer and House Minority Leader Hakeem Jeffries all say to him, Mike, we've got to pass the Senate bill. There's no other thing we can do. And this is the mess that he gave us. It's completely intentional.
That's so important. He had the opportunity. Everyone, all the other components of Congress were saying, you got to do this. And he didn't do that. And that was the easiest, quickest way of aiding both Israel and Ukraine, which is clearly what he has said is in the America's best interest. And he didn't do that.
It's designed to be a shit show that looks like he's a good guy trying to do the right thing. I don't think he's going to get kicked out. And I think that he can count. He knows he can count on the Democrats if they try to take his job. I don't think Marge has the votes. I don't think it'll happen. I think she just wants to keep fundraising off But if that happens,
in other words, him putting these bills out there saying, look, let's vote on this stuff like Ukraine is a signal to Democrats to say, and if I have a motion to vacate from Marjorie Taylor Greene over there, can you support me for that? Because look, I presented these things. But of course, what he didn't do is just put the Senate bill to the floor.
yes, he knows that this is such a gimme for the Democrats that they will gladly call out on the House floor that they support Speaker Mike Johnson keeping his job because they want to look like they're governing. So he knows he has that in his pocket, and that's my take.
I have a question for
that, and I think that's a really interesting take. I'm going to go to it a little bit later, where you've got a guy you've got a Republican that comes out and says some outrageous stuff as far as I can work out. Let's just go a little bit later, actually, here.
Drill down here. So your view is that
she's just summing it up.
This is a grand strategy on Johnson's behalf to A, keep donors on board while B, keeping his job.
And looking like
he has no illusions. Right. Looking like he's trying to pass the stuff when he knows it won't pass. And when he will then not be willing to do any of the stuff that would let it pass. Like, for instance, if he released members to vote for the discharge position, right? That would then, I assume, trigger his removal as speaker, right? So he really he cares about holding on to the job here.
Yes, he does. And I think that he believes that he was called to this moment. I'm sorry. It sounds absurd, but that's what I think he believes. And I think that so he goes to Mar-a-Lago last Friday. Trump says, maybe we could give Ukraine a loan instead of a gift. I'm here to back Mike Johnson. Last night, as we know, he said, we'll see what happens with Mike Johnson. So he's already thrown him overboard. He's not standing out there and trying to make a public showing against Marjorie Taylor Greene and Thomas Massie for Mike Johnson to keep his job. But Mike Johnson, as I said, he knows that Jeffries is going to provide a couple of guys who are going to give him the votes to keep his job, no matter what happens. That's as plain as day. It's just too good politically for the Democrats to not do it. They're going to do it. They're going to look like the grown-ups. They're going to get credit from voters for it.
But that's even worse for Johnson in the long term, right? To be a speaker whose speakership depends on the votes of Democrats?
Yes, of course it is. But I think that the way you can say the
Boehner survived like that for years.
You can say the discharge petition is terrible for him. Well, everything's terrible for him. So if he lets this four-part, clusterfuck go down, then people did a discharge petition without me. It looks like I can't control the House floor. Well, that's already been decided. And then someone does the motion to vacate after a discharge petition. He keeps his job from the Democrats, and the aid goes through.
I mean, so the people understand what Johnson is dealing with here. Republican Representative Garrett Graves yesterday was asked, does the speaker strategy make sense to you? And this is what Congressman Garrett Graves said.
This is an absolutely egregious position from a Republican, and this is what Mike Johnson is up against. I mean, after your man here says what Graves say they go on and absolute character assassinate Graves because they know him in his previous work, or they know him as a lawmaker and a staffer, etc., etc. And we'll skip that bit, but we'll go on to a bit of analysis of what he says.
In a word, no. The reality is you have to keep in mind President Biden asked for Ukraine. President Biden asked for Israel. President Biden asked for aid to Taiwan, and President Biden supports the changes to TikTok. What are Republicans getting out of this?
And if there is a comment that kind of sums up where the US is politically at the moment, that is it. Which is to say that if you have an opposition politician, like opposition president, who asks for the US to do anything, if you are not in his party, you can't let him do that. In other words, you cannot do any bipartisan work for the rest of the time. Like, that's essentially what it says. Is like, you cannot support anything. So even though Joe Biden is doing that for the good of the US, You can't support that because he's a Democrat, and that's what Democrats want. What do we get out of this? And yet, on the other hand, you've got, well, Biden's just asked for aid to Israel, and you were all asking for aid to Israel. So how does that work? Like, so it's a ridiculous position, which is really well called out by Tim Miller in a little while. We just go back to Tim Miller here.
Of it. I mean, this is he is literally saying that the Republicans are not for Ukraine aid, Israel aid, Taiwan aid, or the changes to TikTok. Republicans aren't getting anything out of those policies, right? That Johnson has to get something that Republicans want. So, I mean, this undermines the core argument of everybody in the, Wall Street Journal apologist class of Republicans. They're like, oh, Joe Biden doesn't want to support Israel. Joe Biden is distancing himself from Bibi. We have a Republican member of Congress saying directly that the Republicans don't want aid for Israel. That it's Biden who wants
Biden
it.
does.
Biden wants Israel aid. Republicans don't. This is a Republican congressman who was in leadership till recently. So, as plain as day, right there in the quote, that Republicans need to get something to own the libs. That's what the subtext is here. Biden needs to be owned, and Biden can't be owned with aid to Israel, Ukraine, and Taiwan because Biden wants aid to Israel, Ukraine, and Taiwan. So Biden needs to be owned. That's the thing that's how Republicans get something out of this, is by owning the libs. That's what this guy thinks his job is, and he's one of the normal ones. Supposedly.
Okay.
So, that's what you're dealing with in the House conference right now. These just nihilistic, childish shitbirds.
And so he's really angry. She goes on and backs him up and says, yeah, I'm really angry. I'm not going to bash the table. But it is bad because you've got to this hyper partisan situation where you can't do anything for the right of the world, because if a Democrat even begins to say that that's a good thing for the US, you automatically have to say, therefore it's a bad thing because it's a Democrat that said it's a good thing. And that is paralyzing the US democratic system. And if more and more Republican lawmakers are going to get voted in with those views, because that's kind of what the base thinks, because it's so hyper-partisan, then you are going to paralyze US politics going forward. The US needs to embrace somehow bipartisan getting across the aisle and shaking hands and working together. Until that kind of idea is embraced again, the US is in a lot of political trouble. Colby Badwa says, just skimming it looks pretty decent. But actually, although it looks pretty much like what Biden asked for initially, what Biden asked for is still $40 billion short. This is kind of what Andrew Perpetua was saying on his live stream last night, which is the bill is fairly decent in and of itself. Will it get passed? It's still $40 billion short of what's needed. And then you have your man on C-SPAN casting his opinion as well. And it's all let's see what he has to say here.
I'm doing here what I believe to be the right thing. I think providing lethal aid to Ukraine right now is critically important. I really do. I really do believe the intel and the briefings that we've gotten that I believe Xi and Vladimir Putin and Iran really are an axis of evil. I think they're in coordination on this. I think that Vladimir Putin would continue to march through Europe if he were allowed. I think he might go to the Balkans next. I think he might have a showdown with Poland or one of our NATO allies. To put it bluntly, I would rather send bullets to Ukraine than American boys. My son is going to begin in the Naval Academy this fall. This is a live fire exercise for me, as it is so many American families. This is not a game. It's not a joke. We can't play politics of this. We have to do the right thing. And I'm going to allow an opportunity for every single member of the House to vote their conscience and their will on this. And I think that's the way this institution is supposed to work. And I'm willing to take personal risk for that because we have to do the right thing, and history will judge us.
And I genuinely believe that is what he believes, but he's then absolving responsibility by presenting something that is most likely to be able to be held up by those who are able to hold it up. And he can just say, I've given this over to the Democratic processes of the country.
Latest, Manu, there are still a lot of moving parts about how this will be put together, who will vote on the rule, et cetera, et cetera. Give us the state of play.
Yeah, this is a key moment here in the House over this furious battle to fund the Ukraine, give it aid that it's saying it desperately needs at this critical moment. Republicans have been badly divided for months, and now the Speaker of the House indicating he's prepared to move forward with a package that includes aid to Ukraine. They're planning to vote on separate bills in the House on Friday, splitting up these aid packages between Israel, Ukraine, and Taiwan, and some other measures as well, including a potential ban on TikTok. But after they vote on them separately, they'll be tied together. We expect them to be tied together as one big bill that will go back to the United States Senate. And that is causing furious anger among the right wing of his party, because a lot of Republicans on that right flank have said there should be absolutely no more money spent for Ukraine, and are also demanding new border security measures to be part of any deal. And that is not expected to be part of this underlying bill that, if it eventually passes the House, if it does get the votes. And I spent the morning talking to a lot of those members on the far right, and many of them are indicating that they may support an effort to oust Mike Johnson from his job. The Speaker just...
And then he goes and then speaks to people, as we've seen, and they're all not up for it. Some of these like fringe Republicans, and they're up for ousting him. And then later in this segment, we have a Democrat being asked, well, would you support your man Mike Johnson if there was a motion to vacate? And although he says himself personally, yeah, I'm not too sure at the moment, these are some of the views of some of his colleagues.
Tried to oust Mike Johnson from the Speaker's chair.
I will vote to keep Johnson as Speaker. Just do your job and put it on the floor, and let's get this thing done already.
I think it's unlikely I would support vacating it.
If Marjorie Taylor Greene, someone who wants states to secede from the union, brings up a motion to vacate, I will not support her doing that under any circumstance. Democrats don't even let her rename post offices. I'm not going to let her make a motion to vacate.
He absolutely detests Jared Moskowitz and NTG, and for good reason. So the problem is that, and he talks, I'm going to skip past that, but in that last video, there is talk about the problem being a poison pill. And a poison pill is when, in amendments particularly, you get people trying to put in an element to the bill, amend a bill so that it has something so distasteful that either you hold your nose and still vote for it and it's like yay, because you have that leverage with it being such an important bill, or it sinks the bill. So you get this amendment of like, yeah, we'll have Ukraine aid. Well, like literally, this is what Marjorie Taylor Greene has asked for amendments. These are two amendments that this is bona fide. This is not a joke. This is being widely reported and the text is there. This is insane, but this is your definition, the definition of a poison pill. Marjorie Taylor Greene wants to amend the aid bills for Ukraine and Israel. In case you're asking, no, this is not a parody, I've added the links. Here are the proposals. 1. This is Marjorie Taylor Greene's proposal to the Ukraine aid bill. Any member of Congress who votes in favour of this act shall be required to conscript in the Ukrainian military. And on the Israel aid, by the funds made available by this act, such sums as necessary shall be used for the development of space laser technology on the southwest border. In other words, if we give aid to Israel, we need a space laser. And she was the one that was done for Jewish space lasers, etc., etc. She's still obviously peddling that complete nonsense conspiracy theory. But she wants a space laser on the southern border of the US if they give aid to Ukraine. I mean, to Israel. These are the sorts of people that are in... At least some of these people are in power in the US at the moment. It's absolutely incredible. And it's got to the point where Fox News, which is the bulwark, I guess, of republicanism and indeed sort of moving towards MAGA republicanism. Now, Fox News has an opinion piece titled, Marjorie Taylor Greene is an idiot. She is trying to wreck the GOP. And this opinion piece, the title, I completely agree with. She is dividing the GOP and causing it for the whole Congress to be paralysed as a result. However, this opinion piece is not great on some of the Ukraine claims. To be sure, not all Republicans approve of spending billions more to arm Ukraine, especially since our own border remains wide open. Many of the GOP wanted Johnson to demand border enforcement in exchange for support of Kyiv. Of course, that's a false connection, false contingency. Ukraine is one of the most corrupt countries in the world. It's not. Russia is more corrupt, and Ukraine is moving up the corruption index. That is not true. Well, it depends how you order, where you put one of the most corrupt, because it is there are many countries below it, which is perhaps why Hunter Biden was so richly employed there. I mean, this is all trying to appease the kind of Fox readership here, I think, and it's not clear that America's billions sent to fight Vladimir Putin have all been spent towards that end. Absolute nonsense. It's the clearest amount of aid that's ever gone from the US to any conflict in the world. And in fact, there's more checks and balances. There are teams of people out there to secure that everything does go to the right place. So that is just empirically incorrect. There is almost certainly inadequate oversight. Again, wrong, as I wrote early in the war. Nonetheless, countering, and things have changed since then as well, by the way. Nonetheless, countering Russia's power-mad dictator is the right thing to do. Okay, so now we're getting back onto it. Putin's ambitions will not stop at Ukraine. The next target might well be a NATO ally, which would put US boots on the ground. Though the war has taken a terrible toll on the valiant people of Ukraine, was revealed that it has revealed Russia to be vulnerable. If President Biden had allowed an all-out aggressive war against Moscow, we would not be at a seeming stalemate. Because he dithered, Ukraine is now losing ground and urgently needs weapons and ammunition. So it's kind of blaming Biden for this. This can be remedied. We need to provide the funding and push the White House to outline a path to victory. Okay, so that's all much, much better and more aligned with most of the Republican voters. I think the end here tells you everything. My message to Marjorie Taylor Greene, borrowing from Hillary Clinton, get over yourself. The mission today is to elect Donald Trump. I mean, goodness, if you didn't know what Fox News thought, well, there you go. But that's fascinating because it's saying, right, if we want Donald Trump to get in, Marjorie Taylor Greene, who's one of Donald Trump's biggest cheerleaders, needs to jog on. There is a really interesting schism developing there. But of course, Marjorie Taylor Greene here saying no money for Ukraine. And she said that yesterday. No money for Ukraine. The American people demand a peace deal between Ukraine and Russia. No more death, no more murder. Who's murdering? It's the Russians murdering. And the Ukrainians are protecting themselves. So you're saying that the Ukrainians should not get any resources to protect themselves. They should just let themselves be murdered. And just defend America's border, she says at the end. Just absolute nonsense there. I mean, I have to say, I did add my tuppence a bit rhetorically to that by saying, what did I say? You wicked human being, a political malignant cancer metastasizing in Congress, regularly erupting poisonous rhetorical pus into the information spaces like a boil packed with treacherous ignorance. Congress needs to see a health professional, and quick. I was being rhetorical myself. I quite like that though. Anyway, this is not good from Marjorie Taylor Greene. Anton Gerashchenko pulls her up. No money for Ukraine from the USA means let them all die there in Ukraine and stop bugging us. Yes, we promised to protect them, going back to the Budapest Memorandum. But for me, Marjorie Taylor Greene, it's better if Russia kills them. The lives of millions of Ukrainians have become a bargaining chip in the political game. It is low and dishonest. So not happy at all with that. But there are... So the problem is the amendment procedure. So I don't want to go too deeply into it. I mean, you get the committee of the whole, which looks at amendments, and when you have an hour-long debate on a bill, you can then have amendments in the committee of the whole, and each person gets 5 minutes to add an amendment, as far as I understand it. I don't know how long that process can drag this out. So if this is due for a vote on Saturday night, I don't know if the amendment process can derail the bill for a long time, or whether it can be confined to that Saturday night. Someone who has a better grasp on American procedural politics can let me know. Or political procedures. But do you know, there are some good people in this, and one person I'm gonna lay out as being a good person politically on Ukraine. And Republicans watching this, if you're still watching this, are going to be spitting at the screen because you hate Pelosi. But when Pelosi was a minority leader, I think she was, no, majority leader with a really slim majority in the House of Representatives, she did a really good job of passing bills and getting stuff done, by the way. And she worked, she was known for working, in fact, Liz Cheney's book, Oath and Honor, sings praises about Nancy Pelosi, and that's saying something in her interactions with Liz Cheney. But here, Nancy Pelosi is absolutely on point. She has been to Ukraine. She has been to Armenia. Like, Nancy Pelosi knows her stuff, right? And she's politically on point. And if you want to call her out, I will challenge you on that, because she's got a better grasp on what's going on in Ukraine than pretty much any other American politician I've heard from. However, in the interest of time, I will not play this video and have my comments interspersed between what she says here. I will just direct you towards this video because it is that good. What she says is so unbelievably on point that I'm probably going to do a separate video whereby I do indeed intersperse my comments amongst what she says here, and I'll probably do that today. But go and find the video. Pelosi, every day is a matter of life and death in Ukraine, or success or failure. There she is wearing a lapel of Ukraine, the lapel pin, and talking about Ukraine so eloquently and so on point in every single way that it puts any Republican I've ever heard speak about Ukraine other than Adam Kinzinger to shame. Like, she is knowledgeable, incredibly knowledgeable, and that interview on there is just very, very good. So go and watch that. So the end result here of this analysis is that the bill looks good in and of itself, but quite what challenges there are to getting it to full fruition, I don't know. There's every chance that the Republicans might poison pill amend it or not vote for it. There might be pressure coming from the Trump and MAGA wing so that people who would otherwise vote for it might not vote for it. You shouldn't need too many votes, because I think the Ukraine bill would get almost unanimous Democratic voting. It's going to be very interesting to see the numbers, because I don't think I have seen any, and I mean this, I don't think I've seen anyone in the Democratic caucus denigrate Ukraine in the way that I have seen plenty of Republicans. And they may be fringe Republicans, but there are more of them than I would like there to be, obviously. So anyway, that's my analysis of what's going on. Let me know what you think. Please be respectful. If you disagree with me, let's have some substance and have some good rationale, and let's have a debate about it. Anyway, thanks for watching. Take care and speak to you soon.